Hello, welcome to This Side of the Ceiling. I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Jill. And we're two good friends trying to live this life on this side of the ceiling as abundantly as Christ has called us to.
We are by no means experts, but we love to study His Word and share everything that He has revealed and taught us.
So come along with us as we open up the scriptures and dive into His wonderful Word.
Hello, welcome back to This Side of the Ceiling, and we are still in the study of David.
That's right. We're learning a lot about David.
Yeah, there's so much information and so much to learn. And tonight is probably a popular story for sure that lots of people know about, and also a hard story to hear.
Yeah, we're studying him because he was said to have a heart after God.
Right.
And yet he was not perfect. He had major sin, and we haven't talked about that yet.
Right.
So far, David has been a good example for us, and tonight he's not a good example.
Right.
But yet, it is comforting in a weird way to know that you can have, that a heart that is after God is not a perfect heart.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm glad that the Bible doesn't spare us, and we're not going to spare David. We want to kind of sit in that and think, how did he get there?
Right.
And this story comes not at a time when David is young. You can't blame it on youth.
Mm-hmm.
It comes at a time when he should know better. He's older.
Right.
He's in power. He's seen God be faithful to him over and over and over.
Yeah.
And he's about to screw up royally.
Yes. So we're in 2 Samuel chapter 11, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 5. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. She had purified herself from her uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, "I am pregnant."
Okay, there's a lot in those 5 verses. And we get some detail here. I think that the first verse gives us some insight into the context of this, because it says it's the spring and it's the time when all the kings go to battle.
And David is the king.
And he's the king, and he's not in battle.
Right.
And you don't have to go back very far, just a few verses before that in chapter 10, the Syrians are coming, and I'm just looking at verse 17. It says, "And when it was told David, he gathered all of Israel, and he crossed the Jordan, and he went, and they fought." He was right there with all the people. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if he was tired, or I don't know if he thought he was getting older or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And it seemed to be easy. They destroyed the Ammonites right away and besieged Ramah.
Yeah.
So they were successful. So you get kind of complacent in the successfulness, probably.
That's right. And he if he had been where he was supposed to be, this wouldn't have happened.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that he couldn't have still made other choices, but the first thing we notice is David's not out fighting battles with the other men, with the people, with his counselors. He's at home, and he looks like he's bored and idle. It says it was the evening, and he just gets up off the couch. Like, why was he still on the couch? It was evening, And so I think not only was he not where he should have been, but his idleness gets him in trouble.
Right.
His boredom. We have to be careful about our boredom or our curiosity and be a steward of that, so that it goes in positive directions.
Right.
I think that, work gets we talk about, I've worked so hard, or, I need a break, or I need vacations. It's kind of popular to just talk about how we trying to get out of work, or how try
idleness.
or to not work. What can we do to make ourselves not have to work as much? I mean, even nowadays, because of COVID, we've learned we can work from home.
Right.
So I can work in my pajamas, I can, it's just a little different. And yet, one of the biggest blessings of work is that it keeps us busy and it makes us tired.
Right.
Even as a stay-at-home mom, all those years that you and I both had, probably one of our favorite seasons of our lives of staying home with our children. But it makes me think of that verse in 1 Timothy 2:15 says, she will be saved through childbearing.
Right.
I don't know what that means, but I've always thought, I'm too busy to get in trouble. I'm knee deep in kids.
Yeah.
And so, you're, by the time night comes, you're exhausted,
Right.
and so I can't stay up and watch this trashy stuff on TV anyway,
Right.
because I'm too tired. So those kind of things keep us out of trouble. And David is the king and he's idle. And so he finds some trouble. And then not only that, he's not where he should be. He's bored. And now he's got power.
Right.
And so he's the king. And so we see an example of him kind of abusing that power. Because if you just look at those verbs that you read, he saw the woman, he sent about her, he took her. He saw, he sent, he took.
Right.
And, sin does not, this happens really fast. We just read 5 verses and, Bathsheba's pregnant.
Right.
But sin does not happen that fast. There are
Yeah.
points where you can stop. And I think David's big point was probably should have stopped when he inquired, Maybe he accidentally sees her.
Right.
He's the king, so his
On the
house
palace roof.
is above everyone else's. And in that day, we don't understand this, but kings could have had concubines. They had wives and concubines. So he inquires about her. But his servant is the only one who names this woman.
Right.
David sees a woman. He sees that she's beautiful. She doesn't have clothes on. She's taking a bath, so it's stirring up his emotion. He sends her, and the servant comes back, and we find out about this woman. And this is where David should have put a halt.
Right.
Because the servant says, "Is this not Bathsheba?" And the way he phrases that is like, you know her.
Right.
This is Bathsheba.
Right.
It's not like, this is so-and-so, so-and-so. It's like,
Right.
Isn't this Bathsheba? And he tells us about Bathsheba. She's the daughter of Eliam. She's the wife of Uriah.
Right.
That should have been breaks.
Yeah.
This is where David, at this point he could have gone, oh, my bad. Go to bed, David,
Right.
by yourself.
Yeah.
So, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
But those words should have, not only the wife, but he knew Eliam, right?
Yeah, and Eliam is one of his mighty men. If we go ahead in 2 Samuel chapter 23, it lists David's mighty men, and Eliam is one of them. In chapter 23, verse 34, Eliam, the son of Ahithophel the Gilonite, is one of the mighty men. So this is one of David's mighty men. So Bathsheba would have grown up around David. She would have been there.
Yeah, they were traveling and roaming around. All those people that went to David in those days that saw. So, Bathsheba has been represented several different ways. When I was studying for this, I picked up 2 fictionalized books based on Bathsheba, and both of them kind of, and probably because they were making the story, but both of them kind of represented her as a seductress almost,
Right.
that she, and I don't want to put that on Bathsheba because we don't know that, but she had grown up as a little girl watching David, and we know he was handsome. Says he was ruddy and had attractive eyes, and he killed giants.
Right.
He was a warrior. So I'm sure that she watched him, and maybe she did have a crush on him. But we know Bathsheba to be a faithful woman. And, I have a friend named Sarah Barton who we went to school together, and she spoke at a Pepperdine lectureship. And Sarah and her husband John were missionaries in Jinja, Uganda, for several years after we got out of college. And Sarah told the story about how she would go speak to the women. And this particular time, she had been going out to this village, and each time she would go, she would speak about a different woman from the Bible. She might talk about Esther or Sarah or Ruth. And so she had done this for several times, and she decided it was time to have just a kind of a review day.
Right.
So on this particular day, she said, I want you to, which has been your favorite woman from the Bible that we've talked about? And Sarah said that the culture in Uganda, if we asked that question today, you might say, well, my favorite is Esther, and I might say, well, my favorite's Mary. And,
right.
But in Uganda, they're a culture of community. So when Sarah asked that, who's your favorite, they didn't think personally.
Right.
They thought, well, who is our favorite?
Right.
Which is kind of says something about us that we immediately individualize everything.
Right.
But so Sarah said they began to talk amongst themselves. And she said she heard them talking about Sarah. And she heard them talking about Mary. And then all of a sudden they said, okay, we know. We've decided our favorite person in the Bible is Bathsheba. And Sarah said it startled her because, first of all, she hadn't taught about Bathsheba.
Right.
But then she said, well, why? Why is that? And they said a couple of reasons. One is because Bathsheba was a wife, a multiple wife, and some of them had to share their husband with another wife. Second of all, she loses this baby that is pregnant, and we'll find out that later, but several of them had lost babies. But also that a lot of their marriages had started the same way Bathsheba's marriage starts to David. We're going to find out with a rape.
Right.
Of their husband just coming and taking them. And so Bathsheba, I don't think, I want to put all the blame on David. Bathsheba she was in her own home.
Right.
We see her respecting her husband, grieving him, and she did not have a choice.
Right.
When those people came, she had to go with them. And I think that David takes her.
Right.
And I think the blame lies with David.
Yes. And, another thing we know about Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, who was the son of Ahithophel. And we skip ahead in 2 Samuel and even learn about Ahithophel and who he was. In 2 Samuel 16, in verse 20, David's son Absalom is now plotting against David, and we'll get to that later in the story of David. But Absalom said to Ahithophel, give us your advice, what should we do? And Ahithophel answered, lie with your father's concubines whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench in your father's nostrils, and the hands of everyone with you will be strengthened. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he lay with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now in those days the advice Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. And so David's sin, I think, affects Ahithophel because, Ahithophel is one of David's counselors.
Yeah.
Close to David. And now, in this situation we're talking about today, his granddaughter has been abused by the king.
Yeah, taken, and her husband killed. He would have known Uriah.
Yeah.
We kind of stopped there, but the rest of the story is David thinks he's going to cover this up.
Yeah.
So the first thing he tries to do is, well, let's just bring Uriah back home and everybody will think he is the one who got her pregnant. And Uriah, which every time they talk about Uriah, they call him the Hittite.
Right.
Because he was not a Jew. He was one that had taken on the Lord, not born into Israelite. And yet we see him in this story when David brings him home. He David assumes he's going to go home and spend the night at home, and his servants say, he didn't go home.
Right.
He slept on the door, He didn't go. And David's like, why didn't you go home? And he's like, how? And Uriah has the respect that David is missing. When David says, I'm going to read in verse 10, have you not come from a journey? Why did you not go to your home? Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in an open field. Shall I go to my house and eat and drink and lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul live, I will not do this thing.
Yeah.
So you see Uriah taking
the respect.
Yes. And so now David goes to try to be sneaky. He makes him drunk. And he sends him home drunk, thinking, okay, he won't know what he's doing. And he still is faithful. So then David says, okay, then I'm going to have to just kill him. Yeah. And so he sends orders with Uriah.
Yeah, in his pocket.
In his pocket to tell Joab, I want you to put Uriah in the front of the battle, the worst, and then withdraw from him.
Right.
And that's what happened. And so now not only does David have this rape, adultery, now he has murder.
Right.
I mean, these are huge sins. And like you said, not only have they affected Ahithophel, we have an innocent, godly man, Uriah, who has died.
Right. Ahithophel ends up dying too. And he ended up putting his house in order and hanged himself.
Yeah, but this sin, we never sin in a corner. And, I think sometimes, I read a quote when I was studying for this that said, it was by someone by the name of Lewis, I can't even read my writing, Sperry, you can look it up, but the quote said, secret sin on earth is open scandal in heaven. We don't get away with stuff.
Right.
And so God is going to forgive David. And we'll talk about that next week because we're not letting David off the hook right now.
Right.
But even though God forgives David and David begs for a clean heart and God grants it immediately, this sin is going to have multiple ripples effects. Not only does Ahithophel kill himself,
right.
David's going to lose 4 sons.
Yeah.
He's going to lose this baby. He's going to lose 3 other sons that try to make themselves king or kill each other. And so, one of his punishments is that the sword is not going to depart from his house.
Right.
So I think that sin, that another I think this is interesting. The word, the Hebrew word, when it says that David took her, so David sent the message and took her, is the same Hebrew word that you read in Genesis 3 when it says Eve took the fruit.
Right.
So that point, when they said, I'm going to take that, and David took Bathsheba. And I think it's kind of ironic. I think it's a little humorous when you've got David saw her, he sent, and then it says the only 3 words we get from Bathsheba is, and then she sent and told David,
right.
I am pregnant.
Right.
And I don't know, in those fictionalized books that I read, it talked about how Bathsheba had it was making up the story, the context that she had wanted a child and hadn't had one.
Right.
And, we don't know that, but we know she had been married a while, and she hadn't, for whatever reason,
right.
she hadn't had a child with Uriah. And here
she was on the battlefield.
He was on the battlefield a lot, that's true. But here she conceives immediately. So we're just going to leave David right there in that mess that he's created. And we want to...
There's forgiveness, but there's consequences to sin. Yes. Forgiveness doesn't rid you of the consequences that happen. Right.
And, the Lord warned David about this, and the whole Israelites, about the king culture, that they're going to take your daughters. They're going to take whatever women they want, and that they're going to have, that this power is not going to be good for them. And, we have to be careful about our culture too, because when we're idle and we're bored, we need to be careful what we put before our eyes.
Yeah.
And
stop.
Stop.
Because we do take the wrong step, but then as soon as your eyes are opened and you're not blinded to that, stop.
Yeah, I heard someone talking about the wide path and the narrow path last week, and they said, you're going to wake up someday and you're going to go, oh, I'm on the wide path.
Yeah.
Get on the narrow.
Yeah.
Just get back on, know.
Right.
And so, that Dave would have saved David a whole lot of trouble. But Bathsheba, I don't want to leave her here either. So please come back, because there is more for us to learn from Bathsheba. And also, there may be somebody hearing this that says, I made that horrible sin. We're going to see that God is going to show love to David. And that's one of the best things too, is that there's nothing, as awful as this is,
right,
it does not separate.
That's the encouraging part of this story, because we do see David as a man after God's own heart, a man that asks God before he reacts or, before he responds to situations. But he made mistakes.
Yes.
And he sinned, and he was still called a man after God's own heart.
Yes, and we can too.
Thanks for listening and journeying with us on this side of the ceiling. See you next time.